get a look around. Jim McMurray, can you raise your hand for us a minute? Where did he go?
There he is.
In the back, Jim McMurray is a retired Edinburgh University professor. He has been going through the labor of love of not only having to deal with me, but of painting the people who lived in this house. The Baldwin-Reynolds House has had photographs of most of the people who lived here. We've even had a few engravings, if you will, but we've not ever been able to say we've actually owned oil portraits of the people who lived here. You take a look around, there are several relatives, there are several people who are not relatives. We call them collecting dead relatives. We have them all over our walls, but most of them never stepped foot in this building. The Bar Association of Crawford County was at a function in October for the unveiling of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Henry Baldwin, which you'll see hanging in the front hall. He will eventually be upstairs in the Baldwin study. The second painting on our list, I'd like to introduce two ladies here. Sue Wyckoff and Kathy Such is being sponsored by the Meadville Garden Club. And I will bring them up at this time if they'd like to say anything.
Hi, I'm Kathy Such. I am the current president of the Meadville Garden Club. We're very honored to be able to do this portrait, as Mrs. Reynolds was a founding member of the Garden Club, and it's because of her that we do have the club and we are able to participate in all the events that we have at this beautiful home.
And I'm Sue Wyckoff, and I am one of the co-chairs of Trees of Christmas this year. Mark it on your calendar. It'll be around Thanksgiving weekend and the weekend prior. We're very excited to have the opportunity to support the Baldwin-Reynolds House through the Trees of Christmas. I know everybody enjoys coming. For those who don't know, a portion of the proceeds from the Trees of Christmas go to the ongoing support of the Baldwin-Reynolds House. We have a cleanup day in June where we start all of the yard cleanup. The club members come. And then we are able to provide financing for the ongoing groundskeeping efforts that are required during the rest of the year. So we ask that you all join us in celebrating the Baldwin-Reynolds House and the Trees of Christmas this year, and we're delighted to have been able to help provide this portrait for the house. Thank you.
As I said, as soon as the program's over, we'll put the portrait back out there. Don't feel that you have to run off right away. As I said, we will have plenty of wine with plenty to eat. For those of you who are having a little trouble seeing it, we'll make sure that she's on full display, and for now and for many years to come. If you take a look in your program, and I set mine down somewhere, you'll see there's a list of 50th anniversary committee members. And I'd like to thank everyone on that list. Also, if Mary Mullen could stand up for a minute. I'd like to thank Mary and Eleanor Davies, who I won't ask to stand up, have been working with me for quite some time now on working on things to greatly improve the Baldwin-Reynolds House. As you know, in March, for those of you who followed the Grand Leprechaun contest, Mary and Ellie helped me quite a bit raise some money for the Baldwin-Reynolds House, and I'd like to give them both a long overdue round of applause for that. And the moment we've all been waiting for, I will let her explain the relationship and why dearest Ellie Davies is sitting up here. But first I want to tell you a little bit about how I know Ellie. Ellie Davies has been involved with the museum since long before it was a museum, and she will tell you all about that. But I've had the pleasure of knowing Ellie now I've been director of the museum for about 4 years, and I've known her right about that long, I think. We see each other for lunch on occasion. Ellie and I used to go to the Artist Cup, and that was our favorite hangout. We'd go and we'd sit. She'd say, "Oh, you don't want to hear from me. I have the same stories every single time about Catherine Reynolds." And sure enough, she'd surprise me with something I didn't know just about every time. So I have pages and pages of notes that are scribbled down. I can't read my own handwriting, but at least it is written down somewhere. And she has, at this point in time, I will introduce Ellie Davies, who has a bit of a program on John and Catherine Reynolds and the Baldwin-Reynolds House Museum before it was a museum. Ellie Davies.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me back there. Can you? I'll shout. In 1936, John Reynolds, who was then president of the Merchants National Bank here in Meadville, conducted a search for what was called a cashier. I believe it's called manager of the bank. And he located and hired John David Bader of the National City Bank in Cleveland and a resident of Lakewood, Ohio. John and his lovely wife, Otelia, packed up and moved to Meadville, where they were welcomed by Catherine and John Reynolds and members of the bank board family. In 1939, when I was living in Shaker Heights and dating Joseph Boehner of Cleveland, I was invited to come to Meadville. This is the background. Sorry, you have to to meet his parents and his sister Mary and his niece Nancy. I was 19 and we went to see Gone with the Wind. Later on, when it was wartime, Lieutenant Joseph Boehner and I were married in Cleveland Heights in July of 1942 with the Boehners and a large contingent of Meadville attending. For a year, Joe moved from Army post to Army post, and I was a camp follower. From Camp San Luis Obispo, California, we learned that the 6th Division was shipping out to the Pacific. It was decided that since both my parents had died, I would take 3-month-old baby David to Meadville to spend the duration with the enthusiastic grandparents. Niece Nancy called them Momo and Popo, and I just always shortened it to Mom, so that you'll know who I'm talking about when I mention Mom's name. After getting settled, my in-laws were eager for me to meet John and Catherine Reynolds, with whom they had become very close. We were invited to dinner, and my first impression was what a charming and pleasant couple they were, welcoming me to that gorgeous house. John Reynolds appeared to be outgoing and friendly, where Catherine was inclined to be quiet and properly ladylike. They were obviously very fond of each other. We were ushered into their living room parlor, where awaited the tray of cocktails, and Catherine's brother James Ray Shryack. He was 5 years younger than Catherine. He was slight of build as she was, and he was a delightful gentleman. I understand the Shryack, founder of the department store, does anybody remember it, was their uncle. James Way was a retired architect who had lived in New York City. Actually, family lore tells us that Catherine and James Ray's father went bankrupt in the early 1900s after a failed business deal. However, in those days, where am I? Thank you. The personal estate was placed in the wife's name, while the business was in the husband's name. After her husband died penniless, Catherine's mother, Anna, lived with her daughter, Catherine, and son in a posh apartment overlooking Central Park in New York City until Catherine was married. So much for a sad tale of bankruptcy. Here seems like a good time to insert Catherine and John's love affair. John's parents, William and Julia Reynolds, wanted emphatically for him to marry a young woman from the Congregational Church here in Meadville, and John was adamant because Catherine, who was Episcopalian, was his sweetheart. They waited patiently 4 months till after his parents died, and the parents stubbornly lived until their 80s. And that means that they were married in May of 1911, which meant that John was 57 years old and she was 49. I think that's a long time. to wait, and they took an extended honeymoon. Now, one record says it took 3 months, and another one says a year. So we'll just say an extended honeymoon to Europe and Asia, quote, to let tempers die down. And home, because his parents' friends didn't think he waited long enough to mourn. To conclude, the newlyweds returned to Meadville to this magnificent house that John Reynolds had inherited after his parents' death. And I was being invited to tour, admiring the sun porch, the floor in the library, and that sweeping staircase in the hall. The dining room looks much the same as it did then, with a silver tray on the buffet. The meal was served by a maid, while we conversed mostly about the war. John Boehner was head of the local draft board. John Reynolds was mayor. Otelia Boehner and Catherine Crawford were involved with the Red Cross, as was I. My other mother was probably the best friend that she had, although Catherine often visited Mrs. Kidder, Grand Dame of Meadville, who lived in the mansion later torn down to make room for the David Mead Inn. And I don't know if any of you remember what a controversy that was. Mom Boehner and Catherine shared the love of flowers and gardening, so belonging to the garden club had been one of Meadville's attractions, and Mrs. Reynolds sponsored Mrs. Boehner. Catherine had been one of the 12 ladies who founded the Meadville Garden Club back in 1925. Their purpose was to study gardening and allied subjects and to stimulate in the community interest in better gardening and city improvements. The latter had been enthusiastically endorsed by three-time Mayor John Reynolds. Catherine was the second president of the club when the project was landscaping the newly built library. To raise funds, they had garden parties and teas and parties and flower shows, and what would they think of the trees of Christmas? Mind-boggling. The Reynolds once had a gardener named Sam who took meticulous care of the gardens. When the garden club ladies met at the house, Catherine had Sam put a chain across the driveway to prevent some of them from parking on the grass back there. The Reynolds were not a socially inclined couple, but they enjoyed the company of the Boehners at the Iroquois Club on Sunday nights, and never missed a Saturday night, the two of them, at the cottage restaurant. Anybody remember it? On Saturday night. My neighbor Bobby Thomas was kind enough to write me a note describing Isabella, a roly-poly woman with a heart of gold who worked for the Reynolds by day, and she and Frank Roth did dishes during the dinner hour. Also, during Bobby's senior year in high school, she served a relish tray and a dessert tray at the cottage, and was said that she was thrilled to serve the Reynolds. She said it tickled her because one would invariably say, "Yes, please," and the other one, "Yes, thank you." The Reynolds had always had help, most outstanding being a Russian couple before my time. Nicholas and Nina Filatov worked there from 1926 to the mid-30s. Even well-to-do families like the Reynolds had to tighten their belts during the Depression. In addition to the lovely flower gardens, Nicholas had tended to extensive vegetable gardens, a few chickens and cows. Can you imagine on this estate? And Nina was the housekeeper. John and Catherine Reynolds helped them get their citizenship before they started a life of their own. For anyone who was petite, Catherine Reynolds had a strong presence. I, in my 20s and 5'11", felt slightly gauche and awkward around her. At their house, I could relax somewhat after a Sazerac or two.
They both had their Sazerac.
Nobody had that?
No, they did.
Everybody had a taste? You're still living? It's the New Orleans drink to which the Bayners had introduced the Reynolds. It was the 40s when cocktail hours were the norm, but those are strong. Nonetheless, Catherine remained a perfect lady. One year, the Bayner clan was invited to have Thanksgiving dinner at the Reynolds house. 8-year-old Nancy was bribed beyond words to behave, and Moan Bayner remarked afterwards that high-class John Reynolds carved the turkey so thin that you could see through it. My most memorable event with the Reynolds was the Christmas time, 1942, when Joe was on leave and the whole Bayner family, including Nancy, went caroling at their stately mansion. We entered by that back door and stood in that space under the stairs for our renditions. Little did Joe's parents know what the future would bring. It was the last time they would ever be with their son. John Reynolds was chairman of the board of the bank, and John Bayner was president when Mr. Reynolds died in 1947 at the age of 74. Catherine was inconsolable and became almost reclusive, except for comforting visits from Moan Bayner. Later, I was honored with an unexpected visit from Mrs. Reynolds at Jefferson Apartments, where 5-year-old David, Lou and I lived after our wedding the summer of 1948. There she sat regally in her black dress, hands in lap, feet crossed at the ankles. I was in shorts, a halter, and sandals. I'd sure like to erase that memory. When she was in her late 80s, she entered the hospital where she died in 1963 at 91. And a year or so later, James Ray was also hospitalized and passed away in 1965. John and Otelia Bayner were appointed executors of the Reynolds estate. Theirs was a mind-boggling task which preceded the establishment of this museum 50 years ago this year. Although we can restore the extraordinary house that they lived in, the legendary Reynolds are the likes of which we will never see again. Any questions? Yes.
Imagine. It's such impressive to be here when it was alive, when this home was alive. So what was the dress like when you came for dinner, or what was the period, how did you dress to come?
We're talking the 40s and you dressed up.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't have large groups of people. It was usually just small family groups. And I don't know, whatever we wore in the 40s that was dressy.
I don't know if it's like when you come into a home like this, it's so different.
It is.
Something none of us would be, wow.
It is intimidating.
Yeah.
You didn't wear your halter top and shorts?
Yeah, the furniture was arranged differently than it's been arranged for the trees at Christmas. I don't know what you did with the couch.
No, we pulled the carpets up and we pulled some of the furniture out of the way so we could get this many people in here.
It was heartwarming, though, to come to a house like this with the gracious hosts and hostess, and to be included in such an experience.
Any other questions for Ellie?
You said to remind you of the wedding gift.
I'm sorry?
The wedding gift you got.
Oh, I was, what's your name?
Linda.
I was asking Linda what that article was called that was silver, had a handle, and had places for bottles around the side. And I said, was it something called cruet in And she said yes, it was the crew had said. And that was the wedding present that Reynolds gave Lou and me when we were married, which was lovely, belonged to them. Still have.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ellie Davies. Okay, well, I wanted to thank everybody. As I said, don't feel free to not run off. It's not raining, it's still light out, heaven's sake. I know some of you might have theater tickets to Les Mis at the Academy tonight. We purposefully did this early evening so then any of you who are attending have plenty of time to get there. There's plenty of refreshments left, but before you go, I want to let you know inside your program, and if for some reason you came in and didn't get one, there are plenty by the door. Inside your program on the right-hand side, you will see a list of events for 2014. I said it was hard to top 2013's events. That doesn't mean we're not going to try. For any of you who are fans of the great American author Ernest Hemingway, his personal secretary is coming to Meadville to talk about Ernest Hemingway on March 20th. She'll be speaking, thanks to Allegheny College, she'll be speaking at Ford Chapel at Allegheny at 7 p.m. She started off visiting Spain, and Hemingway cited her. Hemingway and his wife invited her to dinner. They then semi-guilted her into going to a bullfight and offered her a job. She was with him, up to the bitter end, and then helped get his papers out of Cuba afterwards when Castro and communism was, and the fluctuations of power in Cuba were occurring. She had luncheons with Orson Welles. She had midnight run-ins with Castro. This is a woman who, very similar to the local level with Ellie here, who can tell stories that the rest of us weren't around to hear, and by golly would not believe if someone who was there wasn't here to tell us. So we have a full schedule of events, but that's really the highlight. There's Valentine's Day dinners here. There's, as I mentioned, Valerie Hemingway. And throughout the summer, you'll see we're as busy as ever. So I want to thank everybody. Yes, ma'am.
Josh Sherritt is a very humble person, by the way, and being in tourism and the promotion of this home, this beautiful museum, there has not been a person like Josh Sherritt who has brought activities in life back into this home. And I think Josh Sherritt should. Those of you who sponsored tonight, you can write the checks out to her. We paid her to say those things, so we paid her to say those things. Thank you, Anita. But yeah, we try to keep as busy as possible. When I started, we were plugging away at it. I've been here almost 9 years. Joyce Minnis has been here for longer than anyone probably wants to know, or she wants anyone to know. So it's a big job. It's a big team of volunteers, and we keep at it. So feel free to continue to help yourself. There's plenty of refreshments. I see Judith is here, which means there is more wine, I'm assuming. So enjoy and have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.